welcome in. It's another brand new edition of the 901 Soccer Podcast, and I am your host, Lawrence Dockery. And as you can see, we have a very special guest with us tonight. He's gracious enough to take some of his time to join us. He is Simon Evans, a U.S. sports columnist for the AFP, formerly at Reuters. You can find him on Twitter at SGEvans. Simon, how you doing tonight?
Very good, thank you, Lawrence. Thanks for having me. Yeah,
thanks for coming on. So what we're going to be chatting about tonight is several months ago, Simon had a tweet that really kind of got the gears turning in my brain, and it was a very interesting premise and one that I had been thinking about as well. But it's not sure. It's one that I wasn't sure that I really had a good answer for. And the premise for this is that yes, we're all aware that the World Cup is going to be here in 2026, and it's being billed as a watershed moment for soccer in the United States, the way that the 1994 World Cup was a watershed moment for soccer in the United States. But how do you sustain it post 2026? And what does it, if you're in a place like Alabama or Nebraska, I believe were the two states that
right.
you
Yeah.
specifically, and I feel like that would apply perfectly here in Memphis, is how do you capitalize on it if you're in one of these places that doesn't necessarily have, isn't hosting games for the World Cup? So was this just something that you'd been thinking about for a while, or was this one that, that just kind of occurred to you one day and you're like, wait a minute, something's not clicking here?
No, I mean, I think it's something that you hear so many people talk about how 2026 is going to be, Don Garber used the phrase rocket fuel for the soccer in the US. A lot of people talking about how it's going to be a transformative moment, really. A lot of people, the way people talk about it. And looking at it, I can totally see how, if you're in one of the cities that's going to have visitors from around the world turning up, soccer fans from all these different cultures coming into your city, great games being broadcast around the world from your city, I can totally see how that's a transformative event. I've been to a lot of World Cups. I've seen the feeling, and you go back to these places, and, I think of places like Udine in Italy, which hosted games in the 1990 World Cup. And that really building that stadium for that tournament and having people from around the world come in, and it put them on the map in soccer terms. And that can definitely happen. But obviously we live in such a huge country that you think, well, how are people going to consume the World Cup in those states where there aren't games, or B, where there isn't really a strong professional soccer presence? Maybe let's talk about, places that don't have either an MLS team or a USL Championship team, right? Or maybe even a strong USL 1 team. And there's lots of places around America that are like that. How are people there going to experience the World Cup? They're going to experience it on TV. And it might as well be taking place in Qatar again, in a lot of senses. It's just something you're watching in the living room with your family or your friends or on your own, or however you consume your soccer. And I think this is where the big opportunity is. And I know, we all like to point the finger at US soccer and MLS and all the organizations that are actually trying to build the game and so on. And there are things being done. There are things being done behind the scenes to try and, use this as a moment of outreach. I know, I was looking the other day at a program that US Soccer is doing in Georgia, where they've got some FIFA funding, and it's to access to the game for marginalized communities and rural communities and so on. These kind of things are happening, and they don't get talked about very much. But this World Cup is an opportunity to do so much more than that. And so I don't necessarily have the big answer for how, Nebraska gets transformed into a soccer state by the arrival of the World Cup. But I just think, it's something that people should be thinking about, especially now that we are only 18 months away from this thing.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that I feel like everybody talks about 1994 with respect and reverence and awe, and rightfully so, because that's still the most attended World Cup of all time by a wide margin. The Qataris can fudge the numbers all they want. There were 68,000 people a game at the World Cup in '94, and I think the second closest was Brazil in 2014 with 55. When you're outdrawing Brazil at a World Cup by close to 13,000 people a game, that's fairly impressive. But one of the things about 1994, well, there's two things that I think that people forget about 1994 is that 1994 was success in the stands, but as far as like the larger awareness throughout the country of the sport, this is something that I feel like has been talked about a little bit, is that yes, the crowds were big, but it wasn't this big like celebration nationwide. Like there were
Absolutely.
you had a couple of, you think like the Cotton Bowl in Dallas, the Rose Bowl, Orlando, like you had little pockets of the country where the games were, and those are really the only places that cared about the game, about the World Cup. And the other thing about 1994 is, and we'll talk about it as it relates to present day, is 1994 wasn't the only major tournament in the United States in the 90s that helped the growth of the game. Well, you also factor in the fact that the U.S. men went to the World Cup in 1990 for the first time in 50 years. They actually made the Olympics at Barcelona in 92, but then they hosted the Olympics in 1996. And I think the gold medal games there in Athens are still some of the largest crowds on American soil for soccer. And then you had the 1999 Women's World Cup, which was, of course, a watershed moment for the U.S.
Right.
women's national team. So you had in the country 3 international tournaments in a 5-year stretch. And if you want to mirror that to right now, you have a number of years in a row with high level international soccer in the United States. Gold Cup in 23, which, whatever. Then you had Copa America, obviously this past year, which was a massive, massive deal. You have Club World Cup and Gold Cup in the United States in 2025, the World Cup in 2026, and then the Olympics in LA in 2028. And oh, how I do wish that U.S. Soccer had not pulled out of the bid to host the 2027 Women's World Cup, because that would have been a lot of fun to have, 6 straight years in a row. But I think part of what in the past helped grow the game, and now specifically, is the fact that they're every summer for all these years in a row, you've got high level tournaments here in the U.S.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a very different situation to 1994. I mean, I didn't attend that World Cup. It was just before I got to the level of journalism where the news agency Reuters I was working for would send me to a World Cup. I didn't actually start working for them till '96. But when I joined the company, there were some real veteran, well-known soccer reporters there who had covered that tournament, and obviously I chatted to them about it. And the thing that always stuck with me is my editor telling me about how exactly what you were saying. In the stadium, there was a good atmosphere. It was a big deal. There were fans from around the world there. It felt like a World Cup game. And then you walked out and you drive from the parking lot back to your hotel. You stop at the gas station, and somebody says, you say to somebody at the gas station, "Oh, you see the game?" They say, like, "Who was playing?" I mean, even like 10 miles away from the ground, people didn't know. People at the hotel didn't know why you were there. It was a very, very different scene. And it also took place at a time when, MLS hadn't started yet. There was this chaotic club scene in the country that wasn't in a position to capture that enthusiasm until they got the structure of MLS there. And thank goodness that FIFA, for all its faults, actually had that stipulation in the 1994 World Cup bid that you can have this, but you've got to start a proper league. Thank goodness they had that, because there's no guarantee. If you look at the trajectory of American club soccer in the 80s and 90s, there's no guarantee that anything was going to come in its place, right? So,
Right.
and the way it started off, it was so small time, wasn't it? With the level of salaries and the kind of players they were able to get in, that it almost felt to a lot of us, I was outside the States still at that time, it felt like they were doing it as a token gesture that we'll do this for 3 or 4 years, and then well, that didn't work, and we'll move on again. Mm-hmm. So, it's a totally different situation, but I don't think that we will have that problem of people not knowing what's going on. I mean, you still get those moments where, the Copa America semi-final, I was in Charlotte for that game between Colombia and Uruguay, and the whole of downtown Charlotte was taken over by Colombians primarily. Yeah, I mean, literally the traffic had to stop. The people were closing down stuff. It He was well behaved at that time. The trouble came, later on in that night. But you, most cities have been through something like that with soccer. They've had that experience of a big friendly game or a big Gold Cup game when you get 35,000 Mexicans traveling to a city and so on. Most cities in America now have been through that. They know what it is. They know that this is a soccer game. They know that like the fast food places are going to run out of food at like midnight because there's so many people trying to get back to the hotels in Ubers and all the rest of it. And it is so different from an NFL game. So I think it will be different this time. I think it will have a more lasting impact and a broader impact because this is a country now that's familiar with the sport, right? And even the casual sports fan, and I sometimes do these sessions for like brands who are trying to get a handle on like what is a soccer fan in America, and I say, look, soccer fan is a sports fan primarily in a lot of cases. Yes, there is a hardcore subculture niche of people that probably me and you are in, right? But there's also the Pittsburgh Steelers fan who watches a bit of Man United now and then on a Saturday and will follow the US national team, when, especially in big tournaments. Maybe doesn't watch the January camp friendlies, but, there's an awful lot of people in that category of what I would call, like, semi-committed casual soccer fans. That has grown, and the literacy around the game, the understanding, and, it's not cool anymore to like be dismissive of soccer in the way that it was, 10, 15 years ago even, So I think it's going to be very different, the impact that sense.
And I think part of this, one of the next bullet points is, I think to ensure success post World Cup, you have to make sure that the World Cup itself is a success. Now, obviously, the World Cup sells itself. Like there's, you'd be hard pressed to find anybody on the planet, and there's like 10 billion people living on this planet. You'd be hard pressed to find anybody who is unaware of the World Cup. So it sells itself at that point. Plus, you have the additional factor of this is an expanded World Cup, more teams, more games, and so on. But one thing that I think is different in 26 than it was in 94 is I think there is a plan. I haven't seen anything concrete, but I've heard rumblings and discussions and texts with people that, there's going to be other stuff that FIFA does in cities that aren't hosting games. Like there's going to be fan fests and, like you see it I remember at least going back to 2006 in Germany when you're watching, they're like, hey, on the such and such street in this city in the host country, they got the big screen up and everybody can have their FIFA sponsored beer of choice and all of that stuff. And so, cities like Nashville, who was the last team to miss the cut because Bob Kraft may or may not be best friends with Gianni Infantino. Then you've got, the nation's capital, D.C., because Daniel Snyder was a complete disaster and the stadium had sewage problems, or Chicago or Phoenix or Denver. Like these are big cities that have hosted events of this nature before. And for them to not get games is a major bummer. But if FIFA is going to do something like, a fan fest, or, maybe there will be pre-World Cup friendlies. All the teams are going to get here to the U.S. several weeks before the start of the tournament. So I feel like if you are a city that doesn't have World Cup games, maybe you can get, pre-tournament friendlies. Maybe there's going to be a fan fest or something. So I think that right there will also help compared to 1994.
Yeah, I think so. And, you also think about it in terms of like the economic impact of it. All these millions of people or thousands of people coming to the US from around the world to watch these games, and they're not all going to be able to be in the hotels in all the host cities, right? Some of them are going to be having to stay nearby, and there are places. If you think about Kansas City has games, right?
Yes.
Well, they've got a decent amount of hotels there, but probably not enough to cope with 20,000 Dutchmen turning up, right?
Yeah.
So they're probably going to stay in St. Louis, some of them, and take and drive down. And so, are the tourist board in St. Louis thinking about that and thinking we've got an opportunity here where we're going to have like thousands of Europeans and South Americans turning up in our city. They're going to drive off to games in Kansas City, where the hotels will cost 3 times as much anyway, even if there is a room. What can we do with these people? What can we do? And you can create an event, can't you? And that can engage the local community as well. So there's loads of things that could be done. I hope they are being thought about, and I hope there are plans for. I know that the fan zone thing is going to be happening in those cities that have games as well. But I really hope you're right, and we see it happening across the country. And in places where they don't, then people really should be doing their own thing, right? I mean, I think if I was the owner of a USL League One club, and I have 1,500 fans, regular hardcore fans, I'm going to be organising something, for US national team games at my stadium, surely, no? And you can attract people in to get to know, become part of the scene, as it were. There's loads of things people could be doing. So I just hope they do.
And that's, one thing that just occurred to me. You mentioned St. Louis specifically. They have, I remember reading about this back before the 2014 World Cup. Apparently they have like the largest Bosnian expatriate population anywhere in the world. And they, I believe, played a friendly before the 2014 World Cup against Argentina, I think, in St. Louis. So that would be one where if you're, if Bosnia qualifies for the Bosnia and Herzegovina qualifies for the World Cup, if you're whoever in St. Louis, I'm getting on the phone to the embassy. I'm saying like come stay here, since there's already a large Bosnian population here, and you'll be able to to wherever. But you
no, there is.
Something.
In fact, I remember going to St. Louis to report on the Rams leaving town, and I went on the day that Kroenke sort of pulled the trigger and the team headed out of town, and I was talking to fans there, and that came up all the time. It was like, we're done with the NFL. We want a soccer team. We want an MLS team. And then they said, and the Bosnians will love it. So it's a big factor there. There's all those kind of things. And actually, where are the teams going to be based as well? There's a long list. There's a long list FIFA have of like their training camps and hotel places. They're not all going to be in the center of the big cities near the stadiums.
Exactly.
On the contrary, quite a lot of them will be a few hours away because they want a bit of peace and quiet. But for some of those communities, you can imagine some, a place that's got a nice country club set up that can have soccer fields nearby at a nearby university facility or college facility. You could have towns of, pretty small population having the Italian national team being based there. So that's going to be fun as well.
Or, one thing, for what I seem to remember, there was a club team from Spain. I think Athletic Bilbao played a friendly in Boise, Idaho, like a decade ago, because apparently there's a very large Basque population in Idaho, which is insanely random to me. But what happens if Spain's playing a game in Seattle? I feel like that could be some sort of opportunity right there. Boise can't be too terribly far from Seattle. But you mentioned something about, and this is something I have in the notes too, and this is something that you mentioned the U.S. national team. And this is something I've been banging the drum on probably since sports restarted after COVID. This is the United States national team. The nation needs to be able to see the national team, not just Orlando, Austin, and Cincinnati. Like those are, I think that is maybe still one of the last vestiges of the Greg Berhalter tenure or tenures, is that he loved Cincinnati and he loved the facilities in Austin. And so every time you look up, there's another U.S. game in Cincinnati and another U.S. game in Austin. They're playing another game in Orlando this month. But I have long held the belief that to the casual or the whatever type of soccer fan, a lot of it is still driven by the national team. And if you don't ever get the opportunity to see the national team, you're not going to care. So if you're in some place and U.S. soccer decides, hey, we need to do this to get people excited about the World Cup, and then we need to do it to sustain the growth, go to places that you either haven't been in a long time or have never been before. And I had a list at one point in time, and not just off the top of my head, places like Pittsburgh or Indianapolis or Louisville. Louisville did just host the U.S. women's national team and recorded the largest crowd in the history of Lynn Family Stadium. Albuquerque. I would be preferential to Memphis, but I don't know that that's a real possibility. Even though the president of U.S. Soccer is from Memphis, but a place like Birmingham, they drew over 30,000 people in Birmingham for a World Cup qualifier in 2005.
Yeah.
Or Little Rock, Arkansas, or Boise, Idaho, just places like that, that are big enough cities that you can have quality facilities for both teams, but not so big that you're going to get swallowed up by everything else. But take the national team to the nation, and I feel like if that's something they do both pre and post World Cup, it will work out very well for them.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And they've got the luxury, if you like, compared to a lot of other soccer nations, of not having a national stadium that they have to play at contractually or something, or that obligation that, obviously England have that with Wembley, which annoys a lot of people in England, that it's like, well, when Wembley was being refurbished, they went around the country and it was great, and actually reconnected with a lot of the country, because a lot of us grew up thinking it was a London thing, really, and it wasn't really necessarily connecting with us. But I think there's a tremendous opportunity to do that, and the fact that CONCACAF, those tournaments, the Gold Cups and the Nations League, they always want to play in the NFL stadium to maximize their revenue and have all the TV things and everything. Yeah, so where are they? They're in SoFi Stadium in LA. They've been in Vegas. This is the way they're going. I'm sure Atlanta probably get some a Mercedes-Benz, those kind of places they like. Well, you're going to do that anyway then through CONCACAF. Then you have the perfect opportunities with your friendlies games to go to places. I think about with those friendly games, you think about those kind of college stadiums that are like maybe 35, 40,000 rather than the 80,000 ones. That those are great opportunities. There's so many places you could go to play that. I mean, there really is, and it changes things, doesn't it? Well, as soon as you have that team turn up and play a game in town. But there's also been, I think, pressure to play in MLS venues as well. And
I'm sure
there are some great MLS venues, but they should be a bit small for national team games, really.
Mm-hmm. And I don't necessarily even like. I am a fan of soccer played in soccer stadiums. I understand, and everybody that doesn't have their own soccer stadium should definitely try to build their own soccer stadium. We're not trying to say no more soccer in soccer stadiums, but different, like variety, please. Well, like I cannot look. They've played Q2 Stadium like 5 times in 4 years in Austin. They've played Cincinnati like 6 times in the last 7 years. They've played whatever the new name for the stadium in Orlando is. They've been to Lower.com Field in Columbus twice in 4 months after it opened. Like we need a little bit of variety here, and that's something I'll probably
I agree.
Put together a piece for.
And it's particularly also good way to hit those markets that we've talked about. If you go to Birmingham, Alabama. That's going to be the biggest soccer thing that year in Alabama, right? By far.
Exactly.
So
exactly, and I have personally covered a soccer game in Birmingham, Alabama. It's a college football stadium, but it's like a new protective stadium. It's where the Birmingham Legion play. Not a well run venue. Nobody could tell me anything about anything or how to get anywhere. It's almost like nobody ever covers that team, which I don't doubt. But one of the things, and I've made this point over and over and over again, and post World Cup, maybe I understand it a little bit more, but pre World Cup is they're like, oh, well, it's turf or the field is too narrow. And my position is you're hosting a World Cup. You're not playing the World Cup games. I don't care. Get people excited about you put a game at Protective Stadium in Birmingham and tell me you're not going to draw a bigger crowd than another January camp game in Orlando. And I understand the one in Miami against Venezuela that's coming up. You've got probably a lot of Venezuelans in Miami, I would imagine. That's also Lionel Messi's home club stadium, so I'm sure they're trying to have to cash in on that in some way, shape, or form. But there's variety, and I feel like a little bit of a broken record, like I'm Grandpa Simpson, old man yells at cloud.
But you
But
know
you
what?
know,
The thing you're right about. I'll be at that game against Venezuela, and you're right that there will be a lot of Venezuelans there. There's a huge community in Miami now, they're quite passionate supporters of the national team, and that's nice and that's great. But shouldn't it be reaching the stage now where they don't actually think that much about how many fans of the other team are going to be turning up? I
you
mean,
would think, and there was, I've kept track of attendance for a long time, and there was a stretch there, late stages Bob Bradley, and then most of Jurgen Klinsmann's tenure, where they were drawing really big crowds,
yeah,
and
yeah,
with the exception of Mexico, they were always the home team. Like they
absolutely.
did, they were. I mean that World Cup qualifying cycle in 2013, they were going gangbusters. Like every stadium was packed to the brim, and
It's
and
lost something since then, hasn't it? A little bit. I mean, there was. I remember that time, and I covered the team more then than I have done since. And you're right. The second part of Bradley's tenure and the let's say the first half or first 2/3 of Klinsmann's tenure, there was a real buzz around the national team. It felt like it was you could. In fact, I remember people having arguments about like if it was valued as a franchise and compared, how big would the USMNT be compared to the Cowboys or whatever, and that kind of stuff. And it wasn't quite that level, but it was. It was a big deal. It was a really big deal. It seems to have lost that a bit now. I went to the friendly match recently against Panama in Austin. Didn't feel like a big occasion at all. You arrive at the ground, there was no one around. It was like a pretty quiet atmosphere. It wasn't great at all. I mean, they play these teams so often now as well. That doesn't help.
and I think part of it is what we've been speaking about. When you play in the same six stadiums, like why am I in Austin going to get excited for and spend a fortune to go to a friendly when I know next year I get to go to the Gold Cup there? Like, you know, um,
Yeah,
but also I feel like I'd say probably that 2015 CONCACAF Cup special one-off game against Mexico at the Rose Bowl to decide who went to the Confederations Cup in Russia. From there, I would say probably until right now, it's just the level of dissatisfaction with both the performance of the national team and the process of the federation, I think, has really killed a lot of the goodwill of the fan base. And then U.S. Soccer lied to us for a year. We're conducting a real search, even though the only guy we've got on the list is the guy they ended up hiring. And then you watched the tenure, and he fell ass backwards into the greatest talent pool the U.S. men's national team has ever had, and then could have and should have been done in disgrace because of scandal, and in some form of fashion survived and got brought back. And I think that broke a lot of people. Him being brought back, Greg Berhalter, broke a lot of people. And then, you bottom out with your worst showing at a major international tournament in a long, long, long time with the group stage exit at Copa America. Not even one where one or two breaks went against you, but like you looked bad basically from start to finish. I was there in the press box for the game in Atlanta. You may recall I did go just a tad bit viral for asking him if he should lose his job post Uruguay game, which he mercifully did. I am a little bit disappointed that there isn't more buzz with the Pochettino hire. As it's
I
got
think one of the problems is like not having a qualifying process.
I would agree.
It they've got to treat really, ramp it up around the Nations League Final Four. I think that's got to be treated really seriously. I don't want to hear about experimenting and formations and having a look at people and stuff. I think they've got to go out there and try and win that and try and create some buzz and some connection. Yeah, you're right. I mean, the reason I went to Austin for that game against Panama was it was Pochettino's debut. And I was expecting there were some fans did a good job with the banners for him and a little tifo for him and all that kind of thing, but there wasn't I was thinking at the time he probably feels a bit underwhelming to Pochettino, whatever it was, 18,000 crowd in Austin for his first game in charge against Panama, and if it's underwhelming for Pochettino, then it's like underwhelming for the rest of us, isn't it? So. I think they've got to find a way with the Gold Cup as well. not to treat it just as like one of those, even though it's up against the Club World Cup, they've got to, I think, treat that as like, this is it. This is the test now for the World Cup itself. And then hopefully you build out of that Nations League, Gold Cup. If the US win both those things and do it in an exciting fashion, and Pulisic is on fire and that kind of thing, then you can start to feel the hype build and so on. But something needs to happen. I agree with you, because at the moment there's not quite the right vibe around that team at the moment.
If the national team has if the national team if the host nation's national team has juice going into the World Cup, that gives the World Cup that much more juice.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
One thing, sort of speaking on the stadium variety or lack thereof, one thing, and this has been going around in my mind for about 2 or 3 years. Somebody brought it up to me on Twitter a number of years ago, and I don't remember who it was, so I don't remember who to attribute it to. But it's something I've been kind of pushing, and then Tactical Manager on Twitter brought it up, and it just kind of further solidified as, what if the U.S. national team, in a way to go to places they haven't gone before, started playing in some of these college football stadiums? And you sort of mentioned that too, but not just like, not just going to necessarily Birmingham, but like places that are like college towns. And I don't want to hear U.S. Soccer tell me, well, it's too small for this kind of they host 100,000 people 7 Saturdays in the fall. I don't want to hear that it's too small. But a place like Oxford, Mississippi at Ole Miss, or Tuscaloosa, Alabama, or just like in the lead up, maybe from January camp of 26 to World Cup of 26, a series of friendlies in these college football stadiums, like Lincoln, Nebraska. Lincoln, Nebraska sold out an 87,000 seat football stadium for a volleyball game. I feel like you could probably get a pretty good crowd for a U.S. men's national team game right before they host the World Cup. I've been a referee for 18 years. I was fortunate enough to be selected to referee at Southern Regionals in Baton Rouge in 2023. They have a grass field at Tiger Stadium in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. There are, that complex, soccer complex, is one of the biggest I've ever had, like 35 fields. I've never seen a complex like that before.
Right.
So their soccer passion in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, places like that. Maybe we saw this summer. All right. Mexico and Brazil played at Kyle Field in College Station, Texas. Manchester United and Liverpool played at Williams-Brice Stadium in Columbia, South Carolina. You had, I think, Celtic and Chelsea played at Notre Dame Stadium in South Bend, Indiana. Manchester. This one goes out the window because there's an MLS stadium, but you also had Manchester City and Chelsea play at the Horseshoe in Columbus, Ohio. Now, if you're going to play in Columbus, you're obviously playing at the Cruise home stadium, I suppose. But my point being, we've seen some of these large college football stadiums fill up over the summer for soccer. So there's no reason that the U.S. men's national team couldn't and shouldn't do that to get people excited for a home World Cup.
Yeah, it'd be great. I think, certainly mix it in, put it in the mix, some of those places, because that's a fan base that is so important, I think, to the national team. The college football fan, I'm of an age now that I don't hang out at the bar with many college football fans, but when I do have a chat with people, they're always talking about soccer to me. Just because I'm English, so they bring it up and they know what they're talking about. They're interested in it. People are watching it, and the national team's the obvious connecting point for them. So I think that could be, if you could really activate that fan base as well, it would maybe create a different kind of as well for the team in the stadiums. When you go to other places as well, that it becomes a fun party thing to do as well. If you can get a little bit of that vibe going around it, I'm over time. I think when you come from Britain to America and you look at soccer and you sort of want it to be like it is back home. I think a lot of people do that, and I think that's a mistake. And I think after time you start to realize and you start to think, like, wouldn't it be great if there were some bands in the stand at the U.S. national team game?
That would be cool. Yeah, like a.
You know what I mean? Why? That's because when you watch it and you think, like, this is it. This is where the passion for sport is. I love watching college football. We never cover it for either Reuters or AFP. We don't really cover it. But I love watching it in my free time. And
Oh, I love it. I am a fanatic. I am a sicko. I am the idiot that's up at 1 o'clock in the morning watching Hawaii play Washington State. That's me. I'm
right,
that
yeah.
level of sickness. Yes.
But
Um,
so I'd love to see some part of that culture coming into soccer. Absolutely.
so that actually leads me this nice little segue to a little pet project of mine. In that I've done an episode of the 901 Soccer Podcast, and I think this is could sort of tie into what we're talking about here. We're talking about sustaining the growth of the game across all levels. And
Hmm.
to me, success for soccer in the United States is ultimately it's going to boil down to more eyeballs on TV, more butts in seats, and more kids playing at the youth level. Obviously the question is how do you get there? And this is, kind of the whole premise of the show. But one of the things that I think it's my belief that college soccer is a great way and the perfect vehicle to get non-soccer fans into soccer for all the reasons that you just touched on. If you are a University of Alabama football fan and you live in Huntsville or Tuscaloosa or Birmingham or Mobile or wherever, and you don't really have a professional team to support, I would direct you to support the Birmingham Legion, even though they are a rival of the now deceased Memphis 901 FC. But you cheer for Alabama on Saturdays, and if you want to get into soccer, and this is another thing, I have people all the time when there's a big tournament come up. Hey, I want to get into soccer. Who should I cheer for? And well, you're a Bama fan, right? Yeah. Well, they've got a very good women's college soccer program at the University of Alabama. Go cheer for them. Or you live in Lincoln, Nebraska, and you don't know a whole lot about soccer, but you're a Nebraska fan. Go support the Nebraska college soccer team. I was fortunate enough to cover the College Cup Final Four National Championship in 2023 when it was in Louisville, and Clemson actually did bring like some sort of alumni band. Like they had a bunch of people with the trombones and the sax. Like it was like not just like a supporter section where there's like 4 people with horns and 3 guys with drums. No, it was like a 20, 25 people. It's like an
Band.
actual,
Yeah,
like a proper
yeah,
band. Yeah.
yeah.
And so like that is a huge untapped source of growth for the game. Obviously college soccer has its problems as like a developmental player development type situation. You're not going to build a successful national team going the college route, obviously, but as a way to build a successful fandom, I think that is the next logical step here.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because it's invisible to a lot of people, college soccer, isn't it? It's not really on TV. I mean, I know it is on TV. You can find it if you go looking for it, but it's not a big deal on TV. Let's put it that way. It doesn't get talked about. You don't see a lot of it on social media. It's invisible out there. Now, are there people in the NCAA and within US soccer and other bodies looking at that and saying, you know what, we need to actually market this, or we need to present it in a way? I mean, the days of pretending that, like, this is just student sport are, like, over. I mean, that's a whole nother debate we could get into.
Oh yeah,
But
we'd be here for days.
but if ever there was a moment to say, actually, we need to like commercialize and promote soccer a little bit better. We need to build a fan base for college soccer better. And surely now is the time you can do it, because no one's going to turn around and say, "Well, hold on a minute,
Mm-hmm.
this is
Yeah.
this is college athletics we're talking about." No, go and do it, build it, but it needs doing, and it needs professional people coming in, and it's all done. I mean, the other sports are run basically, with in a professional way. They have front offices and all the rest of it. You go to some places, you can't tell the difference between the hoops arena for an NBA team and the one for the college team. They're very similar, aren't they? And why isn't that happening for soccer? Because nobody's really seen the potential there. And I wonder if, you have to sort of break up a little bit the traditional structure of it. Maybe there are conversations going on about the season at the moment, aren't there? I think about when it should actually be played.
There's always conversations about the season as long as I've been around, and the season that quote unquote matters is the fall season, because that's when the national championship gets awarded. But they have a spring season, which I wasn't even aware of until several years ago. But I don't even know if you would need to like have it break off or do anything like that. I feel like a lot of these colleges have such financially successful football programs that it trickles down into everything else. And the same. How am I trying to say this? Like, I'll use the University of Memphis as an example because we're in Memphis. The University of Memphis women's team has hosted a first round NCAA tournament game twice in the last couple of years, right? And that in and of itself was a big deal because it was the first time there had been an NCAA tournament event on campus at the University of Memphis for the first time since like the 70s. Like, so it was a big deal. But you were also playing LSU. And if you watch anything about college athletics, football, baseball, men's basketball, women's basketball, whatever, like that's a brand. That's a Blue Magic. That's a brand that people can recognize and get behind. So if you're, wanting to support your college soccer team and you look up and they're hosting a team like LSU in the NCAA tournament, like that's a big deal. Go out and support them. I would also say that because of the financial success of a lot of these college football teams, that their college, that the facilities for some of these college teams are as good or in some cases better than some of the lower league clubs in the United States. I've had people reach out specifically about the women's facilities at the University of Alabama and at LSU. Not so much the case right now at the University of Memphis, although they are working on getting that fixed. There's a new stadium coming in the future, or a renovated stadium, I should say. But and for the most part, most of the games are free. Like that's one thing that is really upsetting a lot of people, not just across soccer, but across all sports, is just how damn expensive it is to go to a game. If you want to take your wife and your kids or whatever, it's going to cost you $100, $200 to go. Soccer games at the University of Memphis are free. Like you can't you can't get any cheaper than free. and I think it's one of the reasons that I believe so strongly in college soccer is that you have the accessibility to the players and the games that you don't necessarily have at the professional and certainly not at the national team level. Like at a college game, when the game's over, like the players will come over and chat with the fans and do selfies and give hugs and shake hands and kiss babies and that sort of thing. And I feel like the accessibility, I think, is really, really important.
It'd be nice to see, some marketing and promotion done around it. And it has to be done on a local level, doesn't it? That can't be something that, US soccer click their fingers and, it's got to be done and build it out. And I think if you get one or two colleges do that successfully and start to get crowds and you start to see social media clips of like, a decent sized crowd at a college game and a band and some taunting going on and some rivalry games developing and stuff like that could start to go viral online and you start to build something out about it. But it has to be done by the schools themselves, doesn't it? They have to want to do that. It's to be worth their while to do that.
And now is the perfect time to start doing it because, like, you had Copa America this year, Club World Cup and Gold Cup next year, Olympics in 28, World Cup in 2026. So I think colleges, MLS teams, USL championship teams, NWSL, USL League One, like all of these need to tie it into the larger point for the evening is you got to be just sell yourself and sell the World Cup. Like, hey, if you didn't get to go watch the World Cup, but we've got a team here at College Town, USA, come check our team out. Or, you're Union Omaha and USL League One. Hey, you might not get to go to the World Cup, but come hang out with the players while we're watching the World Cup at such and such establishment.
Yeah, I think that's got to be done. I mean, it is difficult, I think, to attract after a World Cup where people know they've been watching the best players in the world to then turn around and say, hey, do you want to come and watch our USL 1 team? That's a pretty difficult thing to do. But that's kind of what the traditional marketing approach would have been, isn't it? Like, hey, you see all the World Cup, you're into the World Cup, come and watch it. If they're actually engaged with the World Cup in conjunction with your club, if your stadium has got a big screen up and you've got a barbecue there and you've got the fans there and they're wearing the colours. Your organised fans can be a real asset then, the supporters groups, because people are coming in maybe casually. Let's watch the US team game down at the stadium. They've got a barbecue on. and you go down and you watch it, and those supporters are almost your ambassadors there, aren't they?
Yeah.
You know, the guys going around there wearing a scarf or a shirt or whatever, and I think that's the way you can tap into it. It's not easy. All this stuff is easier said than done, isn't it? You know, it can be a tough environment, but the smart clubs are going to be doing it. You know, it'll be really instructive to watch which clubs do that kind of thing, because they're the clubs that will be going somewhere, and the ones that take the summer off and think like, well, you know,
Well, they're
World
just
Cup's
gonna
not
the World Cup. They'll just show up.
right.
Um,
Yeah,
um, it's fun. It's funny you say that, because I was thinking this. You know, we can yell and scream about FIFA needs to do this and U.S. soccer needs to do that, but at the end of the day, it is going to have to boil. Like, most of the heavy lifting is going to have to be done by the clubs or colleges or local whoever. Like, that's how it's going to have. It can't just be from the top, and it can't just be from the bottom. It has to be from
right.
both
Yeah.
ends at the same time.
And I think, you know, on that front, I am a bit optimistic, because you're starting to see now some really interesting people starting to get involved in the game. You know, I started talking to a few business people about this recently in the soccer business, and I was asking one guy who's very well connected, and I said, "Is the boom coming? You know, is this soccer boom that's supposed to come around the World Cup? Do you feel it building up?" He's like, "It's here now in a business world." He's like, "People are coming in. PR firms are getting contacted by brands who want to get involved in the World Cup. You're not going to get the top tier sponsorship of FIFA. Unlucky, you know. It's not going to happen now. But you want to be involved in soccer. You want to be associated with the game when the country goes through this big soccer moment in 2026. Get involved with other things, you know. And you're starting to see some quite interesting ownership groups as well. You know, I mean, I've been looking at the team here in Sarasota, Florida, in USL League One, Sarasota Paradise. This is a Swedish guy. I'm hoping to talk to him and do an interview with him at some stage. There's a Swedish guy in Sarasota, Florida, who started a USL League Two club that seems to be picking up like decent support and everything. But he has plans to move them through the ladders as far as you can.
Yeah.
And you think like, yeah, that's really interesting, and they're full of ideas, these people, and they bring in, you know, innovative people around them. There is this kind of new generation. You see what Orange County are doing in the USL with like their crowdfunding ownership programs and stuff. There is quite a lot of innovation and new things starting to go on, and you think those are the kind of clubs and those are the kind of people who will latch onto it, and not those sort of, you know, without naming names, some of the going through the motions clubs that you find in outside of you know,
Memphis
in the lower
901 FC.
divisions. Hey,
Yeah, Memphis 901 FC was very much a going through the motions club, and I had a lot of conversations. I'm like, hey, Copa America's going on this summer. Y'all need to figure out and do. Oh, we're aware of what's going on. We're thinking about doing this, and we're thinking about doing that. And come November, bye bye. I'll tell you one
yeah,
club who is not going to be going through the motions, and they're going to be figuring it out, is Louisville City.
yeah, yeah.
I've got a soft spot for them because I got a lot of family from Louisville, but they're one of the potential base camps for teams. Louisville is for the World Cup in 26. They just hosted the College Cup in 2023. They had a U.S. women's game in 2024. That's
I
one.
love that stadium as well, and I like the whole set. I mean, it's in a brilliant location, isn't it? I think we messaged each other when I went to Louisville for a couple of days, and I was walking around there because I'd never been to a game. I've still never been to a game there, but I went up to the stadium, went in they've got a great shop. It's like, you know, top tier professional club shop. I actually bought a couple of t-shirts there because they're quite nice designs they've got as well. I like Louisville. I like the whole feel of it. It's so close to downtown as well. You can basically walk from any of the famous bars in downtown Louisville to the stadium in 20 minutes, half an hour at the max.
Yeah,
you know,
if that, yeah.
Yeah, right next to the water and the bridge there and everything. But yeah, it's a club. It's interesting. I'm looking forward to talking to them a little bit more over the next few months as well, because I do think they're in that interesting position, aren't they, of a club that's like, they do seem to be a successful USL club. They do seem to be a city that could step up. You know, I mean, if there was promotion and relegation, you'd think Louisville would be one of those teams that'd be in that position pushing for it. what's going to happen with those kind of cities. That's that as well as the places that don't have anything. What
Mhm.
happens after the World Cup with those places where it's really growing and there is interest and there is a connection to the community for whatever reason? How do those clubs go forward? So yeah, I'd love to go and watch a World Cup, fan night at Lynn Family Stadium. There's that little area at the back. Be great for a barbecue there,
Mhm. Yeah. And I think that brings us to a good point where the whole, the tweet said, how do you capitalize if you're Alabama or Nebraska or one of these states where there maybe isn't a lot of professional soccer? And I think maybe the crux of it is capitalize probably has to mean different things in different places.
Hmm.
If you are, and I think Memphis would have been the perfect example of that, where maybe you've bottomed out at 2,800 fans a game, and you are able to capitalize hypothetically and get back up to 4 or 5,000 a game on a consistent basis. There's more coverage, more discussion, that sort of thing. But I feel like capitalize in Louisville, Kentucky, or Indianapolis, Indiana is different than capitalize in, say, Miami or Atlanta or Seattle or Boston or
Absolutely,
one of
yeah,
the
yeah.
World Cup host cities. Um, and again, like, this is, we don't have all of the answers. We have fun throwing our ideas out there, and would love if people took them to heart and tried to implement them. Um, but one thing that I found interesting, and like I said, I'm an attendance junkie and I'm weird and I keep track of stuff like this. So in 2024, admittedly, this is a non-exhaustive, but was still exhausting list of. I tried to track how many people attended soccer games in the United States in 2024, like across all levels. And luckily, I already had a lot of the data already and didn't have to do a whole lot of extra digging. But the extra digging I did have to do still took quite a while. And as best I can tell, 20,398,814 people attended soccer games in the United States in 2024. That's Copa America, that's MLS, that's club friendlies, USL Championship, US men's national team, US women's national team, NWSL, Mexico, NCAA men's tournament, NCAA women's tournament, Leagues Cup, and US Open Cup, and a couple of international friendlies. That is up. In 23, that number was 16,459,157. Now, I wasn't able to get NWSL or club friendlies for 2023, but that's close to 4 or 5 million people gap there from 23 to 24. And I think that maybe kind of speaks to what you had said about the boom's already happening. And one other thing that I have that ties into the same thing is, going back to 2007, I have kept track of crowds of 40,000 or more in the United States, because I feel like if you're talking to somebody who is not a soccer fan, I feel like they would agree that 40,000 is a pretty good soccer crowd. Do you think
Yeah,
that's a fair assessment?
yeah, absolutely. Of course it is, yeah.
In 2024, there were 74 soccer crowds that drew 40,000 or more people. That is
Yeah,
up
that's a good
from
start to have.
There were 54 such crowds in 2023. There were 38 in 2022. There were 27 in 2021. And even in 2020, there were still 3 before COVID shut everything down. So basically, every year since COVID, the number of 40,000 plus crowds has gotten bigger each year.
Yeah.
Prior to this year, the record, as far as I've got going back, was there were 55 of them in 2017. Um, but again, I think this just kind of crystallizes that it's happening. And sometimes it maybe doesn't necessarily feel that way. But do you think that with all of these extra yes, the World Cup, but also Club World Cup, Gold Cup, and Olympics, I feel like we're about to see that just keep getting bigger and bigger. And I feel the more we see of that, it's got a much better chance of sticking.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you do see these cases of clubs that get like really big crowds at the start of the season and then it drifts off, don't you? I mean, I think Charlotte in MLS is an example of that. It still get good crowds, But they're opening of the season, they'll get 65,000 on.
Yeah.
And then 5 or 6 weeks later, it's down to like 32, which is still a fantastic crowd in the context of American soccer to be getting 32,000 in MLS. But it does show you, when you get these big numbers coming out for these games, there's just the amount of support for the game that's hidden away from like our everyday sort of vision. Really, is you see a Copa America, those Argentinian and Colombian fans, the vast majority of them had not flown from Colombia or Argentina for that tournament. They're living here in this country. I went to every Argentina game in that tournament, so I was hopping around airports, and there were Argentina fans everywhere, and yeah, and they're Americans, so there's fans there who were capable of filling, Uruguay. Uruguay is not a big country. You don't think there's a big Uruguayan community. They brought 10, 15,000 to a game in Miami. I mean, probably Miami has a bigger Uruguayan community than a lot of other places, but there's 15,000 fans. That's still a lot for like a country like Uruguay. And you see this at the Gold Cup all the time, don't you? With Honduras and El Salvador. Guatemala's incredible fans turning up at like Red Bull Arena and going crazy and stuff. And you think like, where's that going to be in 10 years' time? Like, if we're thinking like beyond the World Cup, is the domestic club soccer or college soccer, but club soccer at all of its levels, is it capable of engaging? Is it attracting and doing what it hasn't really been able to do in a lot of places? And that's have those kind of people who go to the Copa America games, who are Colombians and Uruguayans and so on. We see it with Mexicans with LAFC, right? Primarily they've got their big supporters section is there's a big Spanish speaking component to it. I don't know if they're all Mexican, but I think it's picked up a little bit of what Chivas left behind from that experiment. But you look at that and you think, can the domestic scene really tap into that? To some extent, it already is doing. I think if I don't know the demographic data and so on, but if you look at someone like, I would imagine that like Phoenix Rising probably get a good amount of support from the Hispanic community in Arizona. Yeah, you see it at other places, but it all mixes together, doesn't it? And like, can you find a way where that's not a big deal? You're not even thinking about having to make a marketing effort to reach people. Where have we got to stage in 2030 where it's completely normal that if you're like a Costa Rican in Pittsburgh that you're watching the Riverhounds, right? That's the dream. That's the dream. But I think that's the point where it crosses from what it's been up from now into where it's soccer's really going into a different stratosphere. When people who, are watching the Premier League, watching Liga MX, who are fans of the Argentine national team and so on, are naturally also fans of whatever club soccer exists in their area.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about being in the middle of the boom right now. And I also I kind of think that if to really and truly capitalize and make it stick, that the work towards going to capitalize on it probably should have started about a year and a half, 2 years ago. Like post 2022 World Cup in Qatar is when the heavy lifting really should have started at the top with U.S. Soccer and at the bottom with all of the clubs. If it hasn't, that's fine. Go ahead and start doing that now. I don't think it's a good idea for them to wait until after the World Cup to start trying to figure out how to capitalize on the World Cup.
No, after the World Cup is when you will capitalize on it, but you need to have the things in place there, don't you? I mean, the other thing is, I think Alexi Lalas has tweeted a few times, think big, do something big and bold and, to capture this moment, right? And he was here at the Soccer X, and I said to him, okay, fine, they're talking about maybe MLS and maybe the other leagues as well, switching the season around to be, to play from fall to spring. That's a pretty big idea. Is that what you think? He's like, I like it. He says, I like it. It's a big idea, whether it's working or not. It's at least it's a big idea. Or at least they're thinking about something. I said, but what else are you thinking about? And he's like, maybe MLS goes and buys USL and so on. We haven't seen any indication of like something that's going to be, after 94, they set up a completely new league and created like professional franchises across the country. We haven't had any indication of anything radically different coming along. But what is starting to intrigue me is indications of like private equity and investors starting to hover around. There's been reports about MLS Next Pro attracting some private equity interest, which is intriguing where that goes. Liga MX has had, Apollo private equity firm together with the NFL looking to get involved and in some way there. How are we going to see like some, ambitious investors coming in to some of these markets we've been talking about? Let's hope Memphis is one of them. But, some of these markets where there aren't teams, or some of these markets where there's teams with the potential that with the rocket fuel that Garber talks about, maybe they could go to another level, Are we going to see like the money really going into like the clubs to really develop it? Because I think the kids participation stuff, that just happens. Right? I think that happens. They're watching the soccer on TV. They're getting energized by the game. Dad, can you take me to some soccer camp or to an academy or whatever? There are pathways pretty much everywhere now, aren't there? Of some form.
There's so many. There's too many to keep track of. I can tell you, as a referee, every time I look up, there's a whole new league, and there's a national league, and there's an E64 league, and then there's regionals, and then there's nationals, but then there's also President's Cup, and then there's regular tournaments, and then there's this, and there's that, and I'm just like, oh, it's too much.
But if a kid turns around to his dad and says, "I want to play soccer," the dad isn't short of options of where to take.
That's
him.
correct. That's correct.
Or to take her either. But you look at that and think, right, that's going to happen by itself. But the club scene needs something to take that fuel and that energy. And where is it going to go? Like, if you do get investment in USL, does that make USL just a stronger, better league, which should be good in itself, right? But is there something radical on the horizon? I don't know, but it's going to be interesting to see, because I think it'd be great just to, there should be something like a target to have 30 more professional clubs by 2035 or something like that. Yeah. But very hard for US soccer to do that when you have this unique sort of situation in American soccer about, well, where are those professional clubs going to play, and what does US soccer think about that, and which one is it giving preference to, and there's all that kind of politics of the game that we probably don't want to go into, but it's going to be interesting to see how that evolves.
Suffice it to say, it's going to be a very fun time. We as a soccer fan for almost my entire life, I never thought that a stretch like this was going to be possible, and it's possible, and it's happening, and we got to find a way to make it stick. And I had written a number of pieces for Bluff City Media at the end of 2024 about attendance and TV ratings and the largest crowds and that sort of thing. And I did this intentionally. Somebody thought it was an accident. Every single one of those pieces I closed with the exact same paragraph, and it's ended with, we're in the biggest stretch of soccer in American history, and if soccer can't make it now, will it ever?
I think it has made it in one sense, hasn't it? Really,
that is true. That is true, and I think that it's such a vague. It's not like a concrete.
I know what you mean, though, because we're still talking about USL teams in the championship getting crowds that aren't acceptable for a second division soccer league in the United States. So it hasn't made it in that sense. Mm-hmm. But the sport as a whole is closer to the mainstream sports world than it's ever been, isn't it? It's you just don't hear that negativity around it. You don't hear those, old jibes you used to get from like old school NFL fans or sports editors in some cases as well. It's not cool to be anti-soccer in America anymore, Yeah. And it's changed, and people know much more about it. People are much more literate about the sport, and it has roots in this country now. And I know there's a lot of people, every time I post something about MLS, there's people come up who really don't like MLS for whatever reasons. But the fact is, if you go back to that 1994 discussion, it's a 30-team league that's been around for 30 years now, and grown pretty much every year apart from that little period of contraction. Given what came before the history of the game here, that's a big achievement, really. When you look at all the leagues that have folded, and you had Pele, Johan Cruyff, and Franz Beckenbauer playing in a league in this country,
and who have ever played the game.
Absolutely, and not finished either. I mean, some of those clips on YouTube, you can tell there were some great players. George Best. I mean, what an amazing league! And in 3 or 4 years, it vanished. That's how unstable soccer was in this country. There's no way MLS is going to vanish. Like, it might not grow as fast as we want. It might not introduce pro rel the way some people want. It might not get everything right and be everything that everyone wants it to be. But it's not going to end up like the NASL.
No.
So there has been a massive change, and I think it's great. I'm excited to see the next level that you're talking about. I mean, that's what I think what you mean when you say make it to that next level.
Yeah.
And that's going to be fascinating to see. But I think there's a lot of people really interested in making that happen now. You're not going around. I mean, other times in American soccer history, people have been trying to convince NFL owners or convince people who have no interest or knowledge in soccer that it's a good investment. Now you've got people saying, do I invest in a European team, or do I invest in an American team, or do I invest in a USL team or an ex-pro team? They're not needing to be convinced that soccer's worth getting involved in. They're just trying to choose what's the best way to get in.
Well, we are over an hour now, so I think we got a lot of good ideas out there. There's a lot of positivity. There's a lot of excitement. We got the World Cup coming to this country in a year and a half, and if nothing else, we can say we got to see the World Cup. I would say that it's a once in a lifetime opportunity, but it is the second time in my lifetime that the World Cup has been here in the United States. Granted, the first time I was not quite 6 months old, but nevertheless, it happened. So thank you so much for coming on and talking about this. This was an exciting one, and I was glad that we got to do it. And who knows? Maybe in 2 or 3 years, we'll have every MLS team drawing 30,000 people a game. We'll have every USL Championship team drawing 10,000 a game.
Yeah, let it be. Yeah, it be. No, thank you very much for the invitation, Lawrence. I've really enjoyed talking to you about all that.
Thanks for coming on. This has been another episode of the 901 Soccer Podcast. You can find us on Twitter at 901 Soccer Pod, as part of Bluff City Media at Bluff City_media. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And we will talk to you next time.